The Western genre has given us some of the most memorable and original villains in the history of cinema. So I'm Mark, and in this video I'm going to count down my top 20 greatest Western antagonists of all time. So at number 20, we have John Herod from 1995's The Quick and the Dead, a tyrannical former outlaw who controls the town of Redemption through fear and violence. He's also a master gunfighter and the reigning champion of his famous quick draw competition, around which most of the plot revolves. In fact, The Quick and the Dead is a western that wholly relies on its big bad, with John Herod being the driving motivator for all the protagonists, and the one character that ties all of their fates together. So it's safe to say that a lot was riding on Gene Hackman and his performance, and despite sharing the screen with the likes of Russell Crowe and Leonardo DiCaprio, the Oscar-winning actor unquestionably steals the show from start to finish, with a fully unrestrained performance as a power-hungry tyrant that you love to hate. Up next, we have Frank Griffin from the 2017 Western limited series Godless. And the show follows a former outlaw who takes refuge in a town run by women, while on the run from the leader of his ex-gang, a ruthless one-armed killer and twisted father figure who, despite his violent nature, believes himself to be unwaveringly righteous, and very much the hero of his own story. Now, these kind of characters always make for the best villains, but there's no question that Jeff Daniels elevates the character beyond what's written in the script, wholly embodying Frank with one of the most impressive and left-field performances of his career that ended up winning him an Emmy. So at number 18, we have Rattlesnake Jake from Rango. Now for some, this might seem like a really odd pick, given that the character in question is a talking snake from an animated movie primarily intended for kids. Yet even so, Rattlesnake Jake proves to be a surprisingly effective villain, portrayed as an unstoppable, bloodthirsty enforcer who always takes a life every time that he comes to town. Now given that Rango is a comedy all about riffing on the well-established tropes and conventions of the Western genre, you would probably expect Rattlesnake Jake to be a tongue-in-cheek pastiche of previous well-known Western villains. However, instead, he actually proves to be more of a sincere homage to them, and ends up being one of the most effective animated villains of all time, thanks to a perfect voice performance from Bill Nye. So at number 17, we have the Swede, the primary antagonist of the Western TV show Hell on Wheels. Initially introduced as the brutal chief enforcer of the Union Pacific Railroad, the Swede slowly evolves over the course of the show, taking on several different roles and personas that reveal him to be a deeply complex, broken individual. But one thing that never changes about him is his hatred for protagonist Cullen Bohannon, with their bitter feud fueling Hell on Wheels for 5 seasons, thanks to the amazing performance of Christopher Heyerdahl, who cements the Swede as one of the most cunning and chilling villains in TV history. So up next, we have Lucky Ned Pepper, played by Robert Duvall in the 1969 version of True Grit. Now the character does also appear in the 2010 remake, played by Barry Pepper, who admittedly did a pretty good job with the role, but topping Robert Duvall was always going to be a difficult task. This is because Duvall always had an uncanny ability to fully immerse himself in the characters he played, and in the case of Lucky Ned Pepper, he very much made the most of his limited screen time, as a pragmatic, ruthless outlaw, hardened by the harsh realities of life on the frontier. As such, Pepper leaves a big impression as a complex, grounded villain, who proves to be a more than worthy adversary for John Wayne's Rooster Cogburn. So at number 15, we have Curly Bill Brocious from Tombstone, the flamboyant and ruthless leader of the real-life gang known as the Cowboys. Now, Tombstone already boasts its fair share of iconic characters and standout performances, yet Powers Booth's portrayal of Curly still manages to be one of the most memorable in the movie, bringing to life an unpredictable, larger-than-life villain who's just as charming as he is cruel. And this makes him a perfect foil for Kurt Russell's principled, hard-nosed Wyatt Earp, effortlessly matching his screen presence in every scene that they share. Next up, we have Asa Watts from the 1972 John Wayne film The Cowboys. And the film follows an aging rancher who's forced to hire a group of inexperienced boys to help him drive his cattle to market, all while being pursued by a gang of cattle rustlers. The leader of which is Asa Watts, played by Bruce Dern, who delivers an unforgettable performance as a deceptive, despicable outlaw who will do or say anything to get what he wants. But what really sets Asa apart from the other villains on this list is that yet he was one of the very few to actually succeed in killing the hero of the movie, in this case the seemingly untouchable John Wayne, doing so in a cowardly manner right in front of the titular cowboys, which instantly solidified the character as one of the most despised Western villains of all time. At number 13, we have Frank Miller, the ruthless outlaw from High Noon, played by Ian McDonald. Now, unlike many of the more flamboyant or larger-than-life villains on this list, Frank Miller is actually a fairly restrained character, with much of his menace coming from his reputation, because the entire plot of High Noon revolves around the fear surrounding his arrival from prison, as the outlaw returns to town seeking revenge on Marshal Will Kane. And the character is a great example of less is more, because for the entire movie to center around how evil he is without ever expanding too much on why, means the audience have to fill in the blanks, which in this case proves very effective in building him up as a terrifying foe. At number 12, we have Charlie Prince from the 2007 remake of 3:10 to Yuma. Now in this version and the 1957 original, the plot revolves around the capture and arrest of the notorious outlaw Ben Wade, who's a pretty compelling villain in his own right, if not more of an anti-hero. However, in the 2007 version, he was completely upstaged by the addition of his fiercely loyal and ruthless right-hand man, Charlie Prince. And a big reason for this was the sheer single-mindedness of the character and his mission to rescue his ally, paired with his cold-blooded nature and unmatched talent with a gun, all brought together in an intense and layered performance from Ben Foster that was so good that it practically became the defining role of his career. So at number 11, we have Loco, a ruthless bounty hunter from the often overlooked snowbound spaghetti western The Great Silence. And in the movie, the character is played by Klaus Kinski, who is no stranger to westerns. But The Great Silence is where the actor really put his stamp on the genre, as a cutthroat bounty hunter in snowy Utah, who hunts down outlaws for profit, with absolutely no regard for justice or morality. And Kinski has great fun with the role, subverting his reputation as an unpredictable, over-the-top actor by delivering an uncharacteristically subdued performance that makes Loco one of the most unnerving and quietly menacing sociopaths that the genre's ever produced. Up next, we have Calvera from The Magnificent Seven, played by Eli Wallach. Now, there's no question that the Western role Wallach is best known for is the fan-favourite anti-hero of Tuco in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And unfortunately, that character seems to overshadow his villainous turn as Calvera, a heartless yet charismatic bandit leader who terrorizes a small Mexican village that he knows can't fight back. And even after the Magnificent Seven ride into the fray to help protect them, Calvera proves to be no less intimidating, showing himself to be a bloodthirsty, manipulative foe who adds a lot to the movie, with his absence really being felt in the lackluster sequels that followed. Next up, we have Calvin Candy, a sadistic plantation owner from Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And Candy proves to be a disturbing embodiment of Southern aristocracy, every bit as entitled as he is brutal, with his casual cruelty and manipulative nature creating a palpable sense of dread and unpredictability in every scene that he appears. And as strange as DiCaprio's casting might have sounded in theory, in reality it was perfect, with the Oscar-winning actor showcasing his ability to completely inhabit a character, no matter how diabolical or vile that character may be. At number 8, we have Indio, the central villain of the classic spaghetti western For a Few Dollars More, played by Gian Maria Volonte. And this was actually the same actor who played Ramon in A Fistful of Dollars, but this time he plays a ruthless, cunning bandit leader who's haunted by his past crimes. And this is really what makes him so compelling, and arguably superior to the likes of Ramon, because Indio actually felt like a real human, driven by complex feelings of anger and guilt, which directly fed into the film's exploration of revenge and morality. It also has to be said that Volonte delivers a standout performance as Indio, which is both charismatic and menacing in equal measure, making him one of the most three-dimensional villains the spaghetti western genre has ever seen. At number 7, we have Jack Wilson, a deadly hired gun from Shane, played by Jack Palance. And the character is the definition of cold-blooded professionalism, with his calm demeanor and steely gaze perfectly disguising his violent nature and startling lack of empathy. And Jack Palance really does nail the part, delivering a performance that's minimalist yet deeply sinister, making him feel like a real adversary for the heroic Shane. At number 6, we have Johnny Ringo, a deadly outlaw from Tombstone played by Michael Biehn. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Tombstone already had a more than capable villain in Curly Bill Brocious, but Michael Biehn arguably steals the show as Johnny Ringo. Introduced as one of the fastest guns in the West, Ringo is presented as a cool, charismatic, well-educated figure that just happens to be a sadistic outlaw with a nihilistic worldview. In fact, the character purposely feels like a distorted mirror image of Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday, making their eventual showdown one of the most memorable in the history of the genre. At number 5, we have Sheriff Bill Daggett, the main antagonist from the classic Clint Eastwood western Unforgiven. Now, this isn't the first time that Gene Hackman has appeared on this list, but his performance and character in Unforgiven is a completely different beast to that of The Quick and the Dead, because in this case, he plays a much more serious figure as a morally ambiguous lawman, who actively abuses his authority by dealing out brutal punishments with a complete lack of remorse. So in much the same way that Eastwood's William Money is a bad man trying to do good, Daggett is presented as a good man who happens to be capable of great evil, which makes for an incredibly compelling villain. However, it's the complex, multifaceted performance from Gene Hackman that really sells the character, winning him an Oscar as a result. Next up, we have Liberty Valance, the violent titular outlaw played by Lee Marvin. Now, despite him having a long and varied career in the Western genre, Lee Marvin arguably puts in one of the most raw and powerful turns of his career as Liberty Valance, a larger-than-life bully and brute who terrorizes the town of Shinbone with total impunity. As such, Valance is essentially the embodiment of lawlessness in the Old West, which when paired with Marvin's foreboding persona and physicality, resulted in one of the most quintessential Western villains of all time, actively serving as the inspiration for many of the characters on this list. Up next, we have Anton Chigurh, a hitman from the critically acclaimed neo-western No Country for Old Men. And a huge reason why the film made such an impact upon its release was due to its unforgettable villain, played by Javier Bardem, who delivers the performance of a lifetime as a terrifying, unstoppable killing machine, armed with a captive bolt pistol and a seriously warped sense of morality. Even his ridiculous haircut made him no less intimidating, as Bardem approaches the role with an unwavering sense of calm and detachment that really feeds into the idea that Anton is more a force of nature than he is a man. So as far as villains go, Anton Chigurh is up there as one of the best in the history of cinema. So at number 2, we have Frank from Once Upon a Time in the West, a ruthless enforcer played by Henry Fonda. And it's difficult to understate just how risky of a decision it was to cast him as a villain, given that he'd all but built his career around playing morally upright all-American heroes, due to his famous baby blues and neighborly demeanor. So when Frank strolls onto screen for the first time and guns down an innocent child with a smile, the genius of Sergio Leone suddenly becomes clear, because it was almost as if he knew that he wouldn't be able to top the villains that he'd produced in the past, so instead he decided to completely subvert that archetype, developing a character who on the exterior appears kind and amenable, but under the surface is about as cruel and unlikable as a villain can possibly be. And in the end, it worked a charm, as the character of Frank helped elevate Once Upon a Time in the West into the same levels of critical acclaim as The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, while ironically becoming one of the roles that Henry Fonda is now best known for. So finally, at number 1, we have Angel Eyes from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Now, when most people think of villains in westerns, their mind will usually go straight to Lee Van Cleef as the titular bad. And this is because Sergio Leone effectively created the perfect archetypal villain, a ruthless hired gun who will do whatever is required to get what he wants, yet at the same time is effortlessly charismatic and devilish. Now, this is obviously due in large part to the incredible performance from Lee Van Cleef, who fit the role like a glove, whilst possessing the necessary screen presence to somehow hold his own against the likes of Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach, which in this case is no small feat. So for that reason and many more, for me, Angel Eyes has to be the greatest Western villain of all time. But let me know below, what would your top pick be? Also, I'm considering doing a follow-up video ranking the top 20 best Western anti-heroes, so drop this video a like to let me know if that would be something you'd want to see. And while you're here, you might also want to check out this video right here.